Hey guys, what's up? Now this is going to be my review of Dunkirk. Now I'm sure you probably know that Dunkirk is Christopher Nolan's newest film, his 10th to be exact. He actually started directing in the late 90s, so not too long. Now the only reason I wanted to see this movie is because Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite filmmakers and one who really inspired me to be a filmmaker myself, especially the Dark Knight trilogy were the movies of his that really inspired me. And I've actually spent this whole last week rewatching all his movies. But I also was really excited for this movie because it's a period piece. And I love historical based films because this film is based on a true story. And it's about the evacuation of French and British troops from the city of Dunkirk. And basically their battle for survival against the Germans. And if I could choose one word to describe this movie, it would be intense. Because honestly, I have not seen a single movie this year that is as white-knuckled and as edge-your-seat exciting as this is. And the reason why this movie is so intense is because it takes place in one location for the entire runtime. It flips back and forth from battles in the air to battles on the land to battles in the sea, and that really adds to the intensity because the whole time you're just like rooting for these guys to make it out alive and you know end up okay, and you're not too sure how it's going to turn out unless you know the context of the true story. Another one of this movie's many pros is the cinematography. Now, if you've watched my other videos on Nolan's movies, you'll know that usually I don't like the cinematography in his movies. And when I say that, I specifically refer to the color palette of his movies. Like, his movies really don't have, a vibrant color palette. But in this movie, the colors actually look really nice. And not just that, but also the camera angles and, like, all these beautiful, beautiful wide shots of all the guys on the beach, the ships, the planes. Every single IMAX sequence in this movie looks beautiful. And that's another thing. This movie, pretty much the whole thing is in IMAX. The whole thing. And it is gorgeous. I saw it in 70mm IMAX, and holy crap, the screen was huge, the sound was so clear, like, my seat was shaking from the intensity of the sound. Like, every time a gun would go off or an explosion would happen, my seat would shake. It was that intense. I was that on the edge of my seat. And also, the score by Hans Zimmer is just as intense. Like, every time explosion or gunshot goes off, like, the music is super high-pitched and fast. But honestly, the main reason why the action is so well done and so tension-filled in this movie is because most of it is done for real. If you know Christopher Nolan, you know that he likes to do stunts and action sequences in camera. Like the dogfights with the planes you see in this movie, the explosions and battles with the ships and on the land, all real. That is dedication. That is some serious committed filmmaking right there. But one thing that I haven't talked about yet that kind of separates this from Nolan's previous movies is that unlike his others, which are very dialogue heavy, this movie actually doesn't have too much dialogue, and it's mostly driven by visuals, which kind of reminded me of this movie, Only God Forgives, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, in the sense that both films are really driven more by visuals than dialogue and story, even though the story is great too, because it's really a tension-filled, powerful, like, white-knuckled survival story that takes place on the land, air, and sea. And that's why it works so well, because of the camera work, because of the effects, because of the music. You feel like you are there with these guys. That's why it works so well. But even though I've been fanboying over Nolan for a majority of this video, I'm going to have to talk about the problems with this movie if I'm going to view it objectively. Now, honestly, as a whole, I didn't have too many problems with this movie, but mainly two. Firstly, the characters. They're just sort of there. They just serve the purpose of, trying to survive, You don't really learn why they're there. You don't really learn who they are and where they come from. You don't know their motivations, which in a way is kind of a bummer because story and characters are the two things that I look for in every movie. But then again, if you think about it, in a movie like this that's set in a very specific time period and about a tragic event, in wartime, you probably wouldn't, have the opportunity to get to know people and, grow to care about people. Like, I don't think these guys, all knew each other personally. So maybe it's realistic in that sense. Except for maybe one, and that's Cillian Murphy's character, who's a British soldier whose ship got destroyed. Mark Rylance's character basically finds him and rescues him. And Mark Rylance and his son and his best friend are basically trying to get to Dunkirk to provide the troops with supplies. And Cillian Murphy's character is just like, I don't want to go back. Like, I'm too frightened. And that's another one of this movie's strengths, is that it touches on the realism of war. Like, these guys, basically go through hell. Some of them, die from, aerial attacks or explosions or bombs or torpedoes. And, it's not necessarily, a graphic kind of movie, but it is, like I said, pretty freaking intense, and you may not want to take your kids to see it, but maybe that's why it works so well, is that it's kind of touching on the realism of war. The film shows how war can seriously affect someone both physically and mentally. And the only other problem that I have with this movie is how the pacing and editing style is somewhat similar to Memento, in the sense that, the movie will cut back to a few different storylines, and the movie will show you a random scene or event, and then afterwards will tell you how that event or scene happened, which kind of distracted me at a few points, but it's not the biggest flaw in the movie. So yeah, if you're expecting a movie with a lot of dialogue and good characters, you're not gonna get it. You're just gonna get a visually stunning and intensely action-packed thriller and drama. And honestly, I would recommend seeing this movie in IMAX. Absolutely, I would recommend it. Because you're going to be blown away by the scale and scope of this movie. So, with all that said, I will give Dunkirk a frickin' good. Or a solid A. Okay, see you guys later. Bye.